Reshuffles were always very anxious times for ministers, because you sort of sit around for long periods of time by the phone, just sort of anxiously waiting for it to ring, worried, when it doesn't. And my first experience, I suppose, was a little bit unusual. I'd only been an MP for 9 months, so I wasn't expecting any phones to be ringing when I went to a birthday party for my son, and then suddenly the phone rang, and you kind of get this moment of terror when the number 10 switchboard says, "Is that Liam Byrne? Can you hold for the Prime Minister?" And you sort of freeze. And anyway, Tony Blair came on the line. He says, "Well, we'd like you to join the government. We'd like you to go to DTI. So you better ring Alan Johnson." And I was stunned. I sort of didn't know what to say. And I put the phone down, and 10 minutes later, it then rang again, and it was Tony Blair's Chief of Staff, Jonathan Powell, who said, "It's been a very long day. The Prime Minister didn't mean to say DTI; he meant to say health. You better ring. You better ring Patricia Hewitt instead." And such the accidents of politics. But a month ago, there was absolutely no hesitation when Gordon Brown rang me and he asked me to come to the House of Commons and he asked me to become the first minister for the West Midlands. And he was emphatic and I was absolutely delighted. And I believe the rationale for regional ministers is simple. It's an extra pair of hands to help us close the wealth gap between Britain's regions, because theory tells us that in a market and over time, poorer communities will always catch up to the wealth level of richer communities. And we've seen it in the EU, we saw it with Ireland, we saw it with Spain, we've seen it with other countries that have joined that single market. And yet, if you look across our country today, you see these differences which are simply too big. In fact, if we close the gap between the worst performing regions and the best performing regions, this country would be £60 billion better off, and this region would be £10 billion better off. That's something like £2,000 each. Now, in the last 10 years, this region has taken enormous strides forward, changes that have really lifted this region up. We've never been better educated, better trained, better connected, with the best ideas wherever on earth they're conceived. We've never been richer. 138,000 more jobs in this region have been created since 1997, and unemployment down 10,000 since 2000, despite the loss of Rover and Peugeot, and 150,000 people benefiting from the national minimum wage. Over £1,000 extra per pupil has been delivered in real terms, and 3,500 more teachers, and over 10,000 more teaching assistants, and 2.4 billion in capital funding for schools, and we now have the best performing apprenticeship programme in the country, up 19% in the last 2 years alone. Now, what do these changes mean? These changes mean that we can close the wealth gap with the rest of Britain, and these changes mean that we can face the future not with a sense of shiftless anxiety, but actually with a sense of acute anticipation. By the time my children go to work in 2020, unless I can get them out of the house any sooner than that, advances in trade and technology will have changed this country and this region out of all recognition. Today, already, something like 3/4 of businesses think that technology will have a profound impact on their business and on the way they do their business in the future. Yet by 2020, computers will be 4,000 times more powerful than they are today. Already, gene therapy is not unusual. By 2015, gene therapy will treat something like 1 in 3 life-threatening diseases. Already, 2 billion people are interconnected in a market that now includes the majority of the world's population for the first time. Yet in 40 years' time, the combined economies of Brazil, Russia, India, and China could be bigger than the G6. And that will create vast new markets for our automotive exporters, our education exporters, our pharmaceuticals, biotech, electronic and creative businesses. These changes could transform the wealth of this country and this region, and we face that future today in a position of strength. Britain is one of the world's most open economies. Exports to Asia are up £15 billion in the last 4 years. We're the world's second best environment for e-commerce already. With just 1% of the world's population, this country funds 5% of the world's science, and we take 10% of the world's internationally recognised scientific prizes. So the risk we run, to quote Nye Bevan, who is one of my heroes, is not that we offer this country or this region too much vitality, but we offer them too less. So there is an extraordinary future ahead of this region, but we, and particularly the people in this room, have to be frank that we have to confront some challenges which are more pronounced in the West Midlands than they are in London, than they are in the South East, or the East of England, more pronounced, because Britain faces this giant globalising knowledge economy with poorer skills and poorer applied science than many of the countries that we have to compete with in the years to come. The UK today has twice as many adults as the US and Germany with low skills. So can anyone believe that our region's skills, basic or advanced, are good enough for the contests of the world today, never mind the challenges of the future? When we have the highest proportion of workers without qualifications in England, can we really say we're confident that we'll win in the future? Or take science. The UK is spending on business R&D lags behind the US, Japan, Germany by a big margin, and is under the average of the EU 15. China and India alone produce 125,000 computer science graduates a year. Their spending on R&D is rising, whereas ours as a proportion is falling. So does anyone believe that the West Midlands can compete in the future when we have almost the lowest rate of R&D spending in England, when we spend something like half the national average? We've made enormous strides forward as a region in the last decade. But the point is, the world is not slowing down, it's speeding up. So we need a fresh start. And in the last 20 days, we've had it. In a series of short steps, the Constitutional Green Paper, the Local Government Bill, the Draft Legislative Timetable, the Subnational Review, DFT's funding statement, we have a quiet, determined, well-organised and pre-orchestrated revolution for the regions. After a decade of devolution from Whitehall and Westminster, we want a further, faster shift of power out of Westminster and closer to the local front line. The Governance of Britain Green Paper calls for a new relationship between citizens, between government and the community. More power passed from central government to town halls, from town halls to communities, and from communities to individual citizens. The Subnational Review sets out bold plans for councils to take on the remit, the responsibility, the rewards and the powers to rejuvenate local communities in a way that they don't have today. RDAs, working with partners, will create for the first time a regional strategy, more accountable to local communities on the one hand and more accountable to Parliament on the other. The draft Queen's Speech has got fresh measures for better transport, better planning, a radically greener country, and above all, we want Britain's future wealth to fund different kinds of communities in the future. And that's why the Housing Green Paper last week proposes 3 million new homes by 2020, zero carbon by 2016, in mixed communities with hundreds of thousands of new homes for families in the West Midlands. I might say, in particular, giving young families the chance, often for the first time, to get a foot on the housing ladder, something that I believe is their right.